The extended infusion set and extended reservoir can both be worn for up to 7 days. However, you may require more insulin than the extended reservoir can hold. In this case, you will need to change only the reservoir while keeping the same set. Before you begin, wash your hands and gather the items you will need to change only the reservoir. To begin, press Select. Select the reservoir and set icon. Select New Reservoir. Now you will need to disconnect the site connector from the cannula housing. Gently hold the cannula housing steady with your finger. Then, squeeze the sides of your site connector and pull it away from the cannula housing. Be sure you do not remove the cannula housing from your body. Remove the reservoir from your pump by turning the tubing connector counterclockwise. Disconnect the infusion set tubing connector from the used reservoir. Place the tubing on a clean surface. Do not throw it away. Safely dispose of the used reservoir. With the infusion set tubing removed from your body and the reservoir removed from the pump, select Rewind. The rewinding screen will appear while the piston rewinds. Rewind Complete appears when the piston has rewound. Select Next. You can now set the pump down and prepare to fill the reservoir. To reduce the risk of air bubbles, make sure the insulin vial is at room temperature. Wipe the top of the insulin vial with alcohol and wait until it dries. Pull the plunger so the top O-ring is positioned at the amount of insulin you plan to put into the reservoir. Be careful not to pull the plunger completely out. Hold the reservoir by the blue transfer guard and connect it to the insulin vial by pressing down. Do not push down on the plunger during this step. Keep the insulin vial upright. Place your thumb on the plunger and firmly push the air from the reservoir into the insulin vial. Holding the plunger with your thumb, flip the insulin vial over so it is on top. Make sure you are holding the vial with your other hand. Slowly release your thumb pressure from the plunger rod, and the reservoir will start filling with insulin. When the reservoir stops filling, pull down on the plunger until the top black O-ring lines up with the desired amount. Tap the reservoir hard enough to make the air bubbles rise to the top. Slowly push up on the plunger rod to move the air bubbles back into the insulin vial. Pull down on the plunger to fill the reservoir to the number of units desired. Repeat as needed until air bubbles are removed from the reservoir. Look in the window of the blue transfer guard to make sure no air bubbles remain. To avoid getting liquid on the top of the reservoir, flip the vial over so it is upright. With the vial down on the table, hold the transfer guard with one hand. With your other hand, turn the reservoir counterclockwise and then pull straight up to remove it from the transfer guard. Be careful not to press on the O-rings. Disconnect the transfer guard from the vial and dispose of it properly. Make sure both the top of the reservoir and the inside of the tubing connector are dry before connecting them. Liquid can temporarily block the vents on the tubing connector. If any liquid has gotten on the top of the reservoir or inside the connector, start over again with a new reservoir and set. Pick up the tubing you laid aside by the tubing connector and place it on the top of the reservoir. Find the right position by turning and gently pushing the tubing connector until you feel it slide smoothly in place. Turn the tubing connector clockwise until the reservoir and tubing connector lock with a click. The tubing connector should not be loose or come apart from the reservoir. Tap the reservoir to make any air bubbles rise to the top of the reservoir. Purge the air bubbles that have risen to the top by slowly pushing up on the plunger until all of the air bubbles have been pushed out of the reservoir and you see a small amount of insulin in the tubing. If you're not able to push insulin into the tubing, disconnect the tubing connector and then reconnect it. Unscrew the plunger rod counterclockwise until it completely separates from the reservoir. Put the reservoir in the pump and turn the tubing connector clockwise until you feel the reservoir lock into place. The tubing connector should line up with the groove in the battery cap of your pump. On your pump, select Next to go to the Load Reservoir screen. With Load highlighted, press and keep holding Select until the screen shows Complete. When you see Complete, Do Not Connect to Body, and a yellow check mark on the screen, select Next. Hold the set so that the needle is pointing down. With Fill highlighted on the screen, press and hold Select. The pump screen will display the amount of insulin being moved through the tubing. Continue to hold Select until you see insulin drops coming out at the end of the needle. After you see the drops, release the Select button. Hold up the tubing to the light to check for air in the tubing. If you see air, once again press and hold Select until the air exits the end of the tubing. Now press Right and select Next. Since you did not change the infusion set, the cannula does not need to be filled. Press Right and select Done. Hold the cannula housing steady with your finger, then push the site connector straight into the cannula housing until you hear a click. Remember, 1 to 3 hours after changing your reservoir, you should check your blood glucose. Checking your blood glucose is the only way to confirm your infusion set is properly inserted and that you're receiving insulin.